Hello, everyone, and welcome to another 30 for 30 episode. That's right, 30 Days of Springsteen, where we are spending every day in November a new episode discussing different releases, aka albums, from Bruce Springsteen. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Joining me now, I have two guests. I have Scott, I have Tiffany, and I am so thrilled you guys are joining me. Ladies first, Tiffany, tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, I am super excited to talk with you. I don't usually do much after 10 p.m. at night.
Mm.
Cognitively, things start to break down at that point. But when Scott told me about the opportunity to share our experience, I was like, I'm all in because I really want to talk about what it meant to me. For context, Scott has always been a huge fan, so much so that when I married him, I understood this is a very big part of his life. And if I want to understand Scott, I need to understand Bruce. And we went to a concert fairly early on, and I'm actually a highly sensitive person. So I remember that I was really overwhelmed by the noise, just the crowds, and I couldn't connect into the music in the way that Scott does, and of course in the whole community. Broadway was a completely different experience that allowed me to connect to the music in a very deep way, like in a very profound way. So, whereas I now consider myself a fan of his music, and he's such an incredible storyteller. So, it was just such a beautiful experience to share with Scott. It was our anniversary. We got married on October 14th, and that's when we saw Bruce on October 14th,
Yes, 20.
2017. And it was just a really powerful experience to share. I want to talk about what it meant to be there and how we experienced the music.
I can't wait to hear it. So, Scott, how about you? What's your elevator pitch?
Well, I'd like to just piggyback off what Tiffany said about the Broadway show just to start. When they announced that, everybody wanted tickets, and it was a very tough ticket to get, and they were not inexpensive tickets. And so he was starting in October of 2017, and they had 7 shows before the official opening night. Opening night was October 12th. And I said to Tiffany, how cool would it be to be in New York City and see Bruce on Broadway on the 14th on our anniversary? So I just tried, and I got lucky and we got tickets for that night, and we were so happy. But my elevator pitch, Jesse, I've told you before, I became a fan in high school. I saw Bruce for the first time in 92 on the Lucky Town Human Touch tour. And I think it's now 33 shows later. Still going strong. Love the music. Got to meet you when I was in Houston. Tiffany loved me being in Houston on Valentine's Day. Um, I think it was in 23 to see that
Yeah.
Houston show. But yeah,
Yeah, I ended up the Linda went down with me to Houston. And so I got a little bit of that one, but yes, I can imagine. So I want you guys got to see it early in the run then,
we did. It
right?
was, the third show. So it was early in the run.
That's pretty amazing. You guys you were able to get tickets?
Yeah, I think I had a choice. We ended up sitting in the last row of the lower level, and I was trying to compare, was that going to be better than being, first or second row upstairs in the balcony? And those were actually a little bit more money. I didn't want to lose them. You've got
Yeah.
that, seconds to make your decisions. We were psyched, and we stayed in the city, and we had great food, and we saw some friends, and got to see that show. And then the next day, Tiffany, I don't know if you remember this, the next day we went back to the venue so we could get photos in the daylight in front of the
Yes.
poster
Yeah.
Yes.
outside the Walter Kurt Theater. It was so much fun. And so, Jesse, tonight we just spent 2.5 hours reliving it and watched the Netflix documentary, which was shot, I think it was early 2018.
Did you notice any difference?
Not really. A little bit. I think there might have been a song or two that he did Long Time Coming on the Netflix special. He didn't do it the night that we went.
Me either.
He did Long Walk Home when we went, but that wasn't on the Netflix special.
Yeah.
but otherwise, I just cried for 2.5 hours. It was so powerful.
Emotional. Yeah.
Yes.
It,
Um,
yeah.
go ahead.
I was just going to add, I was really glad that Scott put it on because it brought me back to the feelings of that performance, of that show. And we are both very moved by music. For me, it's a lot of it is the lyrics and the power, the way that he talks about life, right? The things that he talks about are the hard parts of life, the beautiful parts of life. I have a word that I picked up from one of my favorite authors. Her name's Glennon Doyle. It's brutal, right? It's the brutality of life combined with the beauty of life. And I don't know that there's another artist that does that quite as powerfully as Bruce. But in terms of the melody or the rhythm or the actual music itself, there are probably other artists that I would say I resonate more with the different sound. But I don't think there's anybody who could match him from a standpoint of the power of his words. I just think he is such a poet and such a beautiful storyteller.
So, Tiffany, was there any reluctance on your part to go to, because as you said, when you've seen him in concert, it hadn't really connected. Were you, and it's an expensive ticket, was there a reluctance on your part?
No, I don't think so. So we were we were 16 years into our marriage. So over time, I've come to appreciate a lot more of his music.
Okay.
And actually, with 9/11, I actually remember listening to The Rising and just, the emotion was just so intense. But
Right.
I also remember connecting to the song as the way that I knew that we were going to be okay as a country.
Yeah.
And so I've come to attach meaning to certain songs of his. And so I was actually really excited. I didn't know the format. I didn't know the format of, just he is so raw in that version of, of his music. It's just him and his guitar. And that for me was just such a powerful way to experience his songs. As I said before, it took the emotion to a much deeper level than my concert experience.
Jesse, if I may add,
Sure, please.
for those of us who have been to his concerts, we know that Bruce and the band tell a story during their 2.5, 3.5 hours, whatever it is that they're playing. And he also does that in a way on his albums, from the opening track to the last track, there's a story from beginning to end. I think more so than in any other performance, when we saw Springsteen on Broadway, it was an entire story from the start. And right off the top, he was talking about just how he got started with growing up. He talked about, and I was just crying about this, his hometown and
Yeah.
playing My Hometown on the piano. And then the next two songs, My Father's House and The Wish, about his relationships with his dad and his mom. I can't get more emotional than that.
So I was able to go on January 25th, 2018. I flew in by myself, went to dinner with Bella Pori, who's been on the podcast multiple times, and then went to the show, went back, spent the night in a little pod hotel, then flew back to Dallas the next day. I was really impressed with it and loved it, and we'll talk about some more specifics. But, I kept wanting, when it came out on Netflix, I really wanted my wife to watch it because Linda's a casual fan at best.
Mhm.
And she's watching it, and he gets to talking about his dad. And I mean, she is 2 minutes away from him saying, I'm now going to get you off suicide watch. Before he said that, Linda goes, I can't watch this anymore. This is depressing as hell. I have to go to bed. It's like, okay, that's fine. I don't want to force you. And so I turn it off. And then he like 2 minutes later says that, and I'm like, damn it. When year or so later, it's Father's Day, and Linda and Chris, my adult son, like, okay, for Father's Day, what do you want to do? I want to watch Springsteen on Broadway. Okay, we're fine. And she then loved it because she stuck with it. But what's interesting is Chris was probably 32 at the time. Growing up immediately captured him. I mean, he loved that song
Mm.
immediately. I I guess, did you, and we'll start with you, Scott, and then I want to hear Kirby. Did you do research before you went to the show? Did you know what the set list was going to be? Did you have a feeling of what the show was going to be?
We went in blind. I
Okay.
did not want to know, kind of like what I do at the beginning of a tour.
Yeah.
When I saw that early show on the current tour, when they
Yeah.
started early 23 in Tampa. So
Yeah.
when it was only a couple weeks later in Houston,
Yeah.
uh, I had heard about a couple songs. When Tiffany and I went to New York City, they had done several shows as
Yeah.
rehearsals, but we didn't go in knowing anything. I wanted it to just it be an experience, and my gosh, it was. And I think that's for the most part how I like to enjoy my Springsteen experiences.
Okay. How about you, Tiffany? You went in blind as well, correct?
Yeah, I did. And from really the very first song, I was completely pulled in. You could tell that here was a human being on stage that was completely vulnerable, that was talking about the most intimate and hard parts of his life, and everything from love to relationships with, parents, and the complexity of those relationships, particularly with his father, and this idea that somebody that you can hold as your hero is also the person that doesn't see you, right?
Yeah.
Like the pain of that, and the longing that he had to be seen, truly seen by his father. And I didn't watch the Scott watched the whole 2.5 hours back. I was in and out, but I remember, this is purely from memory, not what I just saw, because I didn't see this piece of it, but I remember he opened with this idea that he was a fraud.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, like, wow, if Bruce Springsteen believes that he's a fraud, then of course imposter syndrome is real for the rest of us,
Yeah.
because here's someone who's achieved such incredible things over the course of his career. And I admire him for many other reasons beyond his music. He's an activist. His messages resonate very, very deeply with me. And I appreciate the take that he has on how we heal as a country. And I'm not going to go into that, but here's someone who's so accomplished and has done so many incredible things in his lifetime. He said that in his mind, he hadn't worked a day in his life. He hadn't had I think his words were something like, I hadn't had an honest job, right?
Right.
And so I was just so compelled by that. Now that was 2017. Today, as a career coach, I'm working with people who have exactly those types of thoughts and feelings around, imposter syndrome, and also their brilliant disguise. We talk about, that I know we'll go through the set list later, but the content of what I do for work is a lot of the things that he talks about. This idea of figuring ourselves out, and sometimes we're close to the grave at the time that we do, because we have these demons and these inner critics. But I was very quickly pulled in by just the vulnerability that he showed on stage.
Yeah. So, Scott, I'll start with you and then I'll go back to you. When I first heard of this, I assumed it would be like the Devils and Dust tour. That was the second show I went to. It's him solo with the guitar and the keyboard and telling stories. And so I assumed that's what this would be. And when Tom Petty had passed and he didn't do a Tom Petty song, on that show the night we did. I knew it was something a little different, and I was struck by he doesn't say good evening, he doesn't say hello, he just immediately goes into the show, right?
Mhm.
So you're welcome to talk about that, but I'm curious, did you expect it to be as funny as it is?
It's Broadway and it's a one-man show.
Right.
And I don't know that I expected it, Jesse, but I was so happy to see that he had humor. He spoke like an everyday guy. He
Yeah.
swore. He was sincere. He was emotional at times. Now, we were in the last row of the lower level, and we were, not far from the stage
Yeah.
because it's a very small theater. But watching tonight on Netflix, watching it back, there were times where I could almost see tears. And not that I know that it was a performance, but I have to believe that each night there was some real to it for him.
So
Absolutely.
I want to hear what you have to say, Tiffany, but I intersect here. As I said, my son watched this, and afterwards he said, how does he do that 6, 7, 8 times a week? He said, I've just watched it once and I'm an emotional wreck. How can you have that and go through those things of emotion every week? So yeah, I agree with you. Tiffany, how about you? Thoughts on what Scott just said and also the humor of the show?
Yeah. So I guess I didn't expect the full range of emotion, right? Everything. And part of that was we went in without expectation. It was fairly new. We got lucky. There's no question that especially that early on, I remember feeling his emotion from our seats, right? Like you could tell that he was living the pain of some of the experience that he sings about. Another memory that came to me was a story that he had about what grief feels like to him, and I remember it was something about a tree that was no longer there, right?
His hometown.
In his hometown. Okay. So, and I lost it with that because I knew at that point I still had my father, but I knew that someday I was going to go through that experience. And I knew that the way that Bruce described his own grief was going to be helpful to me. It was going to be a way for me, especially as nature is that's my church, that's my temple, that's where I connect most deeply, both to myself and the rest of the world, is in nature. And so this idea of the tree, and that you could even though the tree was no longer standing, it was this the sense of it having been there and having been a part of a very connected part of him that's not going to ever go away. He'll always go back to. Some of the details are sketchy for me, so I apologize if I'm really messing this up. But for me, what it was about was knowing that you don't need the tree physically in order to still have the feeling that it produced and the love, right? So, because really, it was a metaphor for surviving beyond the physical realm. And so the way that I translated that has stayed with me. Fast forward to the year that I did lose my dad in 2022, I remembered that story. And it's actually been a very important way for how I integrate my own grief, is that that love has only gotten deeper without his physical presence. And I connect it back to remembering, like, it was almost like I'm going to need this one day, right? So there's a lot about his storytelling that just translates to the human experience. And that's what I appreciated.
Jesse, he talked about the tree and not being there anymore in the same vein as how he still talks to his dad and Clarence and Danny and others that have passed, his heroes from the shore that were his first rock band, love, and they're still with him. And that could be said for all of us, that these spirits are still with us.
Yeah, I was really touched by that as well. And I remember it had been a while since I'd read the autobiography. So some of the stories I vaguely remembered, some I felt like it was only when I went back and read the book I went, "Oh yeah, he talked about this." I think he shared a lot of himself, and I was surprised how funny it was. I was surprised how funny he was. And Ron Martz, who's a writer, made the joke during the pandemic when he was doing the From My Home to Yours, where he was a DJ and telling stories and playing songs. Ron's like, we know he's a great storyteller. Why are we surprised that he's good at doing this kind of storytelling? We knew he was a great storyteller, but to have this weave the story of himself and then the band and then the country was really strong. And so, yeah, I loved how funny it was. I loved how touching it was. And so I'll go back to you, Tiffany. Obviously, everything's wonderful, and there is, as you guys mentioned, there's no lowlights. But is there a couple of places that were especially emotional, touching,
Mhm.
especially as you were talking about you hadn't lost your father yet, but you kind of in the back of your mind going the same way you throw extra money in a savings account, like I'm going to need this money at Christmas because we're going to have to do. So tell me a little bit about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think the parts that moved me the most was certainly that story. I remember that story feeling transformative, and it also was experiencing the music in a way that I had never before. That was really a highlight. But I think the part that was really most touching for me was him talking about love.
I knew she was going to steal this from me.
He, tougher than the rest with a brilliant disguise. And
Yeah.
to me, the reason that those songs were back to back, I completely understand that. I
Yeah.
completely understand why he set that up that way.
Hmm.
And it had everything to do with we barely know ourselves. How can we trust somebody else to love us as we're figuring it all out? And also the courage that it takes to stick around while someone's figuring themselves out, right? The whole notion of I've got you, I'm tougher than the rest. It was a special day for us, and 16 years into a marriage, you know that you'll have hard days, and you know that you'll have brilliant, beautiful days and everything in between. And I think the opportunity for us to sort of reflect on all of it was brought about from the music, and was brought about from the way that he talked about love, the way that he talked about his own fragility and the ability to sort of trust something. It was hard for him, and I just appreciated how raw it was. You could tell that there was no part of that story that Bruce was exaggerating. He was just so open and out there with the fact that he really and truly had some significant demons. And I think we all do, right? So that was the part of the show that I felt connected most deeply with me.
Scott?
That part of the show was a highlight for me when he and Patty are together and
Yeah.
they're sharing those words, the songs, the emotions. It sounds so good. Their harmony together. I love those two songs, and Tiffany just talked about the whole meaning for her,
Yeah.
and I'm with her on that. That was certainly one of my favorite parts of that show on Broadway. But I said it earlier, I have pretty deep ties to my hometown where I grew up in Eastern Massachusetts outside of Boston, and I can understand when he's talking about his history and Freehold and what it means to him, and that his whole family was there and they were within spitting distance to the church and God was all around him. And I don't get that deep with my hometown, but anytime I hear the song and really listen to the lyrics, it chokes me up also, just because I love knowing that I still have people there and I can still go there. And those were my two highlights, I think.
So and I'll share mine. I had two surprises. I am not a fan of, and I've told the story before, I'm not a fan of the blues Born in the USA version. I just don't care for it. And when I saw that he was doing that, I was kind of, because I did sneak and know the set list. And I was like, ah, okay, eh. And then when he tells that story and he says, and I wonder who went in my place,
Mhm.
and he plays that song, I go, shut the F up, Jesse. You don't know squat, and you should trust Bruce. So that was a really powerful moment for me. And then the second one that surprised me is when I saw that he was doing Dancing in the Dark, I was like, wow, it seems like you could have picked a better song. Like if you're only doing a X amount of songs, this isn't a concert. This isn't, you aren't having to play to a crowd. I'm kind of surprised he did that. But then once again, he talks about after the discussion of our country, and he talks about how his mother embraced dancing and looked at the good in
Mm,
people. And then it going from Dancing in the Dark to Born, Land of Hope and Dreams, which is arguably my favorite Springsteen song. Once again, I went, okay, I'm an idiot and I should trust Bruce. So those stories, any comments? And then is there something, while you've talked about what's meant to you, but was there something that surprised you? And we'll start with you, Tiffany.
yeah. Well, so I just want to say on your connection to Land of Hope and Dreams. So Scott, I hope you're okay with me sharing this. So,
Sure. Go ahead.
so,
Go for
so,
it.
so Scott and I actually we met because I had just recently gotten out of another relationship and was not really in the mood to date again, was just wanted, some time. But my mom was enthusiastic about helping me find somebody. And she went onto a site, I think it was some Jewish single site, and she had printed out several profiles, and then back then she sent them to me snail mail. So I
Right.
received them through the US Post because
I
this
love
was
mothers.
it was 2000, and so
Right.
we didn't have, it wasn't like Hinge and Tinder. This was like very, very new that people were meeting each other this way. So she sent me a few of the profiles, and I distinctly remember that the title to Scott's profile was Land of Hope and Dreams. I didn't connect it to Bruce at the time. I barely knew his music. The only music that I knew were those two songs that you weren't excited about,
Yes.
because those were the
Yeah.
ones that were really big. And so
Right.
I certainly have, memories of those two songs in particular, but that was his title. And now that I know him and I know the meaning behind the words, it all makes so much sense that he chose that. So that was my reflection. In terms of what surprised me, so one of the things that surprised me, I guess, was I'm a fan. Like
Yeah.
I am positively a fan of this musician, of this artist. And I don't think I ever internalized it that way. Since we saw him, I've actually written some blog posts about his music. And one of the things that I say is like, when I hurt, I want to hear him, right? He's the guy that I want to hear because he understands pain, he understands loss. And so I think that was the thing that surprised me the most, was being there, recognizing like There was a part of me that went in that was probably like, well, I'm probably the least invested here. Do I really even belong? And
Yeah.
I left, and Scott and I, this happens a lot when we go see the shows and anything. We're always the ones when the curtain comes up, we're a freaking snotty mess, right?
Yeah.
We got stuff hanging out of our noses and our eyes. And for me, I think that was the surprising part is like, I am a solid fan and I have a very deep understanding of why this man moves people.
I love that.
I'll go back to the Land of Hope and Dreams. That song was pretty new when we met in
Mm.
2000 because
Yeah.
Jesse, I'll give you a little story here. I think when I was on with you, I was lucky to see the first rehearsal show before the reunion tour in
Yes.
Asbury Park at Convention Hall.
Yes, I
And,
remember.
and that's where they debuted Land of Hope and Dreams for the first time
Yeah.
ever in March of 99. And so when Tiffany and I met, I mean, this was less than a year later, and that song became one of my favorite tunes at the time and just felt it appropriate for me to be meeting someone that would hope to become a partner in life with me. I wanted them on to share my feelings of being in the land of hope and dreams. So I wanted to share that story. I was surprised at how emotional just the
Yeah.
whole it was a roller coaster ride for me. And we can't go to a movie or a Broadway show or a concert or anything out to eat without me becoming a mess in conversation or whatever it might
Yeah.
be. And a lot of it started that night, I think. So that's probably what was most surprising to me.
Is the Wrecking Ball Land of Hope and Dreams or the 99 live version the one you think of most? If you had to pick which one's the
I like
release
the
for you.
first
Okay.
99 live.
So I just had Peter Chianca from Blogness on the Edge of Town talking about Wrecking Ball. And he said, think about it. They've played a whole show and they come back and do a new song. Like the guts of this band going, oh, and now we're going to fit not in the middle of a set list or early in a set list, toward the end of a set list, we're playing a new song. And yeah, it's one of my favorite songs. And when I need a pick me up, I will often go to that Dancing in the Dark, Land of Hope and Dreams, that 1-2 punch that is just amazing how he does that on the guitar and switches it over and it just it brings my heart joy every time I hear it.
There was such a feeling in the audience. Tiffany can probably agree with me that when he went into Dancing in the Dark with the upbeat mode that he was playing it on his guitar, the
Yeah.
crowd was happier. The crowd was there's a little bit more energy. I mean, because it was completely silent for the whole show
Yeah.
during his stories, but they were basically not sitting on their hands anymore. And it went right into Land of Hope and Dreams. And that was a great way to end the show right before Born to Run.
Yeah.
I
So
I did notice that he slowed the tempo down for several of his songs, which allowed me to absorb them better. Right,
right.
again, being highly sensitive, it's was just a more digestible format for
Yeah.
me to really connect to the music.
Yeah, like I think a good example of that is 10th Avenue Freeze Out, where it's a little bit slower and it's a little bit more just the piano. And it's still a powerful song, but him to talk about the band and how, the 1 + 1 = 3
Yes.
is just a really, really absolutely wonderful story about that. So, any final thoughts on so when you hear the release, Scott, does it obviously do you think it holds up to the live experience?
It absolutely does. It brought me right back.
Yeah.
And whether I'm listening when I hear it on E Street Radio and they play a track from Broadway, it's like I'm not going anywhere for the next 3-4 minutes, so I can relive this. For us, it's 6.5 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
or
That's
or
nice.
or yeah, something like that.
So Tiffany, have you been to a show since? And
No, I have not. And I'm still not sure whether or not I would connect to the music in the way that I need to and I want to.
right,
What I will say is that I'm so grateful because E Street Radio was always on in Scott's car. So wherever we go, I'm convinced that the man could listen to it 24/7. There'll come a point where I'm like, all right, we need country, or we have to switch gears here, right?
About 45 minutes, and then she says, "All right,
Yeah,
need to change
let's
the
put on the
channel."
highway, or the
yeah,
coffee house or something like that. But I am so grateful because it's allowed me to understand my husband better, which is a beautiful experience. Um, but it also, in so many ways, is sort of the soundtrack of life.
yeah,
If you think about, he's now
yes,
in amazing shape, and I'm in awe of what that man can do in terms of putting on a performance. I mean, it's truly remarkable that every part of him is still so committed to putting on this 3+ hour show. I mean, it's incredible. But I'm most grateful just that I'm able to connect with the music in a way that I never dreamed I would have been. And it's a really cool experience, and one that we can share. And Scott actually took our oldest Adam. He went to his very first concert, and it happened to be with Scott and a Springsteen concert. So I think, it feels also like it's being passed down. I also remember Josh, Josh is our younger one, and like when he was trying to fall asleep, he would listen to some of the music, right? He was listening with.
You're talking
yeah,
It
about
was a long time ago. He was little,
yeah.
but I just love that it's become a family experience and that our boys can appreciate it as well.
Tiffany, as Bruce told Howard recently, he doesn't have any plans to stop.
Oh,
So
right. He
there'll be a
said,
chance if you want to see him maybe a little bit further on up the road.
well,
Yeah.
you have to share the quote from Bruce. He
I
said,
don't remember the exact words. You
he
probably
said,
do.
nobody has luggage on top of a hearse, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
And which
Right.
was his was such a beautiful way of saying, I'm doing this until I'm in the grave. And so,
yeah.
yeah, he's brilliant. He is
That's
just
good.
brilliant. Yeah.
How about you, Scott? Any final thoughts?
Jesse, I could come on and talk to you about my love for Springsteen, every week, but just having the opportunity for Tiffany and me to talk about one of our favorite evenings, it's just an honor, and thank you for having us. I would love to be able to experience another show with you at some point in the future, and
Absolutely.
and thank you for having us.
I end every podcast with the Mary question. And since you have not been a guest before, what the Mary question is, and Scott may have talked to you about this, but Jay Armstrong is a retired honors English teacher. He would give his students the lyrics to Thunder Road, and they would read it as if it was a poem. And
Wow.
then they would ask his students at the end of the class, do you think Mary gets in the car? So, Tiffany, I'm going to put you on the spot. And if you don't have an answer, this will cut out and no one will know. But do you have an answer? Do you think Mary gets in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
So it's what I remember is that Scott told me this story, right?
Okay.
But I don't remember the lyrics well enough to answer that. So I'm going to say I
Okay.
don't
Okay.
feel informed enough. But I do remember the story that Scott told me about, like that's like the $1 million question.
Well, that's very nice. I will cut this out. That's what I said. No problem. Guys, this was so much fun. Thank you. I really, really appreciate you both joining, and that makes it very special for me. I am so glad you guys to share that night. Linda and I have we had been married, let's see, so I guess 2012, so whatever 84 to 2012 was. We had not gone on a vacation by ourselves in a long time. We'd always gone with another couple or with a kid, and we decided we wanted to do. So we got in the car, we planned this. We drove to Kentucky, did the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, went up to Cleveland, saw Bruce in Cleveland, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, came back, finished the other half of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, and came home. And we called it our Bruce and Bourbon Tour. And it reminded us that we liked hanging out with each other,
Yes.
right? And just for the first week of October, we flew to Boston, October 4th. We spent 3 days in Vermont, 2 days in New Hampshire, a day in Maine, back to Boston, flew home. And it was just her and I. And it was just so much fun. And yes, she did say, "Enough, Bruce. Can we listen to something else? Do you have anything else on your effing phone?" So my lovely bride and you would be in sync in that way. What do you want to say, Scott?
Yeah, well, I have one last thing to add, Jesse. I should have mentioned it earlier when Tiffany was talking about the Rising. We were married a month after 9/11.
Wow.
And there were questions at the time, family and friends asking, are we still going to have our day and go through? There was no doubt we were going to be married that day. It was such an important fall, beautiful day for us. A little rain didn't put a damper on anything. And the Rising coming out shortly thereafter, and I believe it was 2002, right? It was just so meaningful, so important for the country. It was important music for us that we related to. And that is part of why Bruce is so important to me, the music. And I know that Tiffany has an appreciation for it because it goes back to us getting together, and that was the music that came out after 9/11, and it was just so important for us.
Yeah, I love that. Tiffany, if you can, email me a couple of links to some of your blog posts about the
Sure,
Bruce. I'd love
sure.
to talk about it. And I feel like we could do a whole nother episode of just talking about career coaching and how you can use Springsteen lyrics and Springsteen things.
I
Uh,
should.
I will cut all this out.
She'll have you on her podcast.
Yeah, I know this is past your bedtime and I really appreciate it, but I went to Manila for my job a couple of jobs ago, and they said, "Hey, since you're a director, whenever a director visits, would you be willing to talk to the employees? We always like to have a little, like tell the different story, kind of town hall meeting."
Mm.
And my theme was I used Better Days, the
Oh, wow.
lyrics,
Okay.
and I said, because I think too many times people focus on when I get that raise, then I'm going to be happy.
That's
When I
right.
get the promotion, then I'm going to be happy. When I
That's
get the
right.
kids out of diapers, then I'm going to be happy. And I said, you got to enjoy the journey.
Yes.
So that,
I love that tie-in.
yeah. So that's
That's
great.
great. That's
All
great.
right, you guys, listeners, go back, remember, watch the Netflix special, dig up the release, go back and experience that. You know, Bruce, between the autobiography, the Broadway, and Western Stars, there was this trilogy of him telling his story. And now we have a new chapter in the Road Diary. But go back and remember that and share the experiences. I know you're going to love it. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, listeners. Everyone, be safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.
Thanks. Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks, Jesse.